What's going on, everyone? My name is Nicholas Merton here at DataDash, and today is January 8th of 2019. Well, folks, I hope you all are having a fantastic day wherever you are, and today I want to spend a decent amount of time to talk about a very revolutionary piece of technology that started to hit the cryptocurrency space. What was once originally conceptualized back in 2016 on a white paper has now started to materialize in 2018 and 2019, and it adds a variety of features that we've been seeking out in the cryptocurrency space. You might have heard about it before. It goes by the infamous name of MimbleWimble. And for those of you who have heard of it or are hearing about it for the first time, do not let the name overwhelm you if you think it sounds too technical, and then also don't laugh it off if you think the name is silly, as much as it is silly. This technology is, and this concept of this technology is very impactful, to put it lightly. So we're going to be spending some time to talk about the origins of the name, but also what this technology really means. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the video. So where does the name originate from? Well, MimbleWimble itself, the name originates actually from a reference to a spell in the Harry Potter series. And you'll find as well that whoever founded MimbleWimble, we don't actually know who they are. There is an anonymous individual going by the name of Tom Elvis Judicer, which is obviously originating from a name of the character Voldemort from Harry Potter. So again, they must have really liked Harry Potter in this case. And you'll see a lot of the projects that are actually building and integrating MimbleWimble keep making references to the Harry Potter series, so I guess it's an ongoing trend now. But basically, this technology, to put it lightly, and I'm going to read it straight from the sentence here, the technology is a new approach in how transactions are recorded, counter to Bitcoin's system of inputs and outputs. So we'll talk first, before we dive into MimbleWimble, as to how Bitcoin actually records transactions. I feel many people actually be kind of surprised as to how, in a sense, inefficient Bitcoin is at recording transactions. It plays a role into what Bitcoin is meant to be. It's supposed to be an immutable, traceable ledger in this case, so it does its job. But we'll see how there's some inefficiencies in the system, and how later on how MimbleWimble can actually fix some of this. The third point here I want to make is that, again, it offers immense improvements here. We could see true scalability with MimbleWimble on some of the previous blockchains we know of, and also some of the newer ones that are integrating this from the get-go. But along with that, you tend not to find the ability to have scalability, but also improve features like privacy and even fungibility in this case. The reason privacy doesn't usually come hand in hand with scalability is because privacy usually requires heavy encryption, as we've seen on the Monero network. And because of that heavy encryption, it is much less scalable. You have to have blocks that are much larger in that case, and it's just very difficult to scale when you have all those layers of encryption and all those technologies like stealth addresses and ring-CT, etc. So lots of things to be dealing with on most privacy coins. We're going to, thankfully, thanks to MimbleWimble, be able to get around to using a lot of that. So let's go ahead and talk first about how Bitcoin transactions are recorded. And it's through what's known as UXTO, unspent transaction outputs. So we have to spend some time about how, to get a visual representation. And thankfully, block explorers do a really good job of this. Block explorers are the websites you can go on, or the applications that show you, a record of the Bitcoin history. They're connected to a full node, and they have a full source of all the transactions. Well, we can see here, for example, that in a given transaction, in practically every case, there is going to be two outputs. Why would that be? I mean, if I'm just sending someone money, wouldn't it be that it would be a transaction, in this case, an output in this case, which is the origin amount from my wallet, and then I'm sending some of it to an individual? Well, that is one part of the equation. In this case, that's the spent part of the transaction. So we can see here from this output of 11.8 Bitcoin, we're sending, in this case, 11 Bitcoin in reality to another user, right? So we're actually sending 11.04, continuing on, to a user, but the unspent amount is what we're sending to another Bitcoin address in this case. Or this is, again, another transaction. We have to generate a second transaction to send back our own funds back to ourselves. It seems kind of counterproductive, but this is just how Bitcoin tracks it in this case. And you can see it's the same exact thing here. We can see what's unspent and what's spent in this case for these transactions. And this is how every Bitcoin transaction works on the Bitcoin network. And to visually represent this a little bit better between inputs and outputs, I'll go ahead and show you guys this awesome diagram. It's very simple. We have three transactions here, starting from transaction A, where Alice withdraws 0.35 BTC from exchange. So she has a total of 0.5 BTC in inputs in her wallet, 0.5 Bitcoin or half a Bitcoin deposited in her wallet. And she has to generate two outputs. The one that is going to go to the exchange in this case 0.35 BTC, and then the rest that she's going to send back to herself, in this case 0.149. Now you're probably wondering why there's a little bit missing there, and that is because she's going to have to pay a fee in the transaction, so it's just accounting for that in the diagram. And the same goes here. For example, Alice pays Joe, for example, 0.35 BTC on the exchange platform. And again, has to incur a small fee, but the output is matching with the input in this case. And then the input goes on, for example, in the case where Joe pays Bob. In this case, Joe has 0.349 in inputs, and he's going to make two matching outputs that match that value, where he's going to keep a little less, around 0.0485 in his wallet, whereas the rest is going to be going out towards Bob in this case. So this is how Bitcoin transactions work, just to get a good brief understanding. A lot of people don't know how this is how transactions work, but it's important to get that understanding out of the way before we jump into MimbleWimble. But what this system does is it guarantees two very important things that any payment solution across the world has to guarantee. It has to guarantee that there can be no double spend. It has to guarantee that when I send 5 coins to you, or in the case of paper currency, when I'm giving you 5 euros, I can't just poof, create more currency out of thin air. I can't double my money where I still have 5 and now you have 5 and now there's $10 in circulation. We can't have that. It's the same with how we can't have double spends on Bitcoin. But along with that as well, there's a second variable that we have to have, is to make sure that the only person who has the authority to move money, in this case in cryptocurrency, to move currency somewhere else, to transmit value, is to make sure that the only person who can do it is the one with the private key, to make sure that the one who should have proper authority of that money gets to be the sole sole sender or transmitter of value of those funds, right? It's quite simple. These are standard things that Bitcoin is met to. So we have to make sure that MimbleWimble or any other alternative system does these things, and MimbleWimble does, and it does in a very unique way that doesn't really have what we would similarly see as addresses and the standard way of inputs and outputs that Bitcoin uses in a case. So it uses similar technology, but we'll get into it as we talk about it overall. So MimbleWimble transactions are like Bitcoin in the sense that they do involve inputs and outputs in this case that are going to cancel out. We need to make sure that, in this case, values that I transmit to you get canceled out on my end from the sender to the receiver. And MimbleWimble does this as well, but it does it a little bit different than Bitcoin. And along with that as well, rather than signing each input of the transaction, you create a multi-signature across all inputs and outputs. So again, cutting down on a lot of the data-intensive aspects of Bitcoin. And unlike Bitcoin, MimbleWimble does not have to keep this long traceable record. So not only is it private, but it's much less data intensive, right? So this is really good to see in this case. It's two great features that come with it in this case. And we'll talk a little bit about visualizing this later on. And it also uses something known as a blinding factor. Now, this blinding factor is what adds the privacy to the transaction. It lets us not know, what amount is being sent, just like how it would be on Monero, for example. So again, being able to build confidential transactions in this case. Very exciting stuff. So what is the math that this technology MimbleWimble uses? How can we get at least a brief understanding? I would say, a very kind of middle school understanding of this, an elementary understanding, rather than a very complex one that's going to take hours, days, or weeks for an average person to understand. Well, there's a really great article, and I'll leave it linked down below if you guys feel like I don't explain it justice in this case. It was created by a guy named Connor, who I think works at Beam, which is a project that's implementing MimbleWimble, which we'll mention later on. In this case, he wrote a really good article explaining MimbleWimble for someone who might be not as experienced or technical. I'm one of those people as well. So we're going to go through and actually talk a little bit about his explanation and get an understanding as to what MimbleWimble uses in regards to transactions, and how we'll see that they use, rather than a private key on a wallet to gain access to transmitting funds, how they almost use random numbers, or numbers that would be very difficult for an average person to guess, using elliptic curve cryptography, much like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies use for their private keys, to do it simply on individual transactions. It's very interesting. So we'll go ahead. I'll explain that a little bit more later on. I don't want to overwhelm you guys. So to start off, this is just something to kind of get you thinking here. If I were to give you these math problems here, and I wanted you to find the output of the equation where the question marks are, do you think you could find it? Well, of course, these are quite simple. I mean, whether you were to, cheat and use a calculator, or if you were to go about just simply writing these out and using the same tactics you were probably taught in public education on how to solve these, you would be able to get to the results of these within a matter of a few seconds to a minute or two. It really depends on your speed. But nonetheless, you'd be able to get to these results here. However, if many of you remember from school as well, there's the topic of factoring as well. What if I gave you this right here? Would you be able to find the answer of the inputs in this equation, or the factors in this equation, to reach to the outcome very quickly? Probably not. It would probably take a little bit longer to do this. Factoring does take some time, and the thing is, it's much more difficult to reach, what led to the end result, rather than, what do inputs lead to, right? Now, a computer could probably do this very quickly, but as a human, it would be quite difficult. And this is where I want to lead to here, in the sense of MimbleWimble, in the sense of what it uses in regard to masking both the amount of a transaction, but also, in this case, the ability to transmit value. In this case, we have a long amount of factors here, with two of them actually censored in this case. So they're question marks. We don't know what they are, that equal to some kind of outcome. MimbleWimble uses this difficulty of finding a factor, in this case, one of the things that are being multiplied, one of the values, in regards to having the authority to send value and also see what was transmitted in value. So in this case, much like a private key on the Bitcoin network, how it is very difficult for a computer to guess it, for anyone to guess it, even if they know your public key, to get the matching private key would be extremely difficult. Through the use of elliptic curve cryptography and this methodology, they're able to make it so that you not only cannot see the value of a transaction, but that the only person who has the authority to transmit the value that has been inputted into the wallet, the only way you can take that input and turn it into an output, is to make sure you have the variables that no one knows about. So it's like a private key in a sense. It's very difficult to guess. A computer, you'd have to have immense computational resources guessing for years upon years upon years to try to guess that value set. So it is pretty much secure in that sense. It's secure in the sense so long as no one knows about those random variables that you've inserted, and you're the only one who knows about it, you're the only one who can transmit value. And it's a very unique system, I think. I'm very fascinated. Once you kind of hit that eureka moment, it starts to make sense. And it'll start to make sense more as we go throughout this. So in this case, our variables here, as we mentioned earlier, were 23 and 83. I mean, actually, we didn't mention this earlier. I apologize. We will talk about this more throughout the video. The 23 and 83 are the values here. Now, in this explanation, computer could get this very quickly. But as we're talking about much larger numbers and using elliptic curve cryptography, which is going to make this much more complex, much like exactly with how a private key does it on the Bitcoin network. So as I mentioned, we can do this with amounts too. We can add these random variables that make it very difficult to know what the origin amount was. And again, we can apply this later throughout the actual process and get more in detail as well into understanding how MimbleWimble actually operates. So first, we have to talk about something known as a Pedersen commitment. Okay, Pedersen commitment in this case is this combination of an amount portion and a key portion. So as we can see down here, it specifies that the amount portion is involved, but it gets to hide the amount by multiplying it by a big number. In this case, it could be whatever massive big random number. And along with that as well, a private key portion as well, which is also multiplied by a big number. Again, masking the key there in that sense. So this is what a MimbleWimble, in very simplified terms, how MimbleWimble generally operates. It has two Pedersen commitments in this case. So we have our different variables here. We have the amount sent, we have key 1, we have the amount received, and we have key 2. And in this case, we're multiplying the amount sent and the amount received by a big number 1 in this case, and then key 1 and key 2 by big number 2. Okay, so these two differ in their values. It could be, again, just some large number. It doesn't really matter what it is. But in this case, these very large numbers that we're multiplying. Well, let's simplify this down. We don't have to have this so complex in this case, even though we're just working with labeled variables in this case, right? We're not even talking about numbers just yet. But let's simplify this equation down. It doesn't have to be this complex. So let's say we have our key variables here. This is our transaction. Now, of course, people wouldn't see this in this case, but we can see here that I am transmitting 5 coins to you in this example. Let's say that I'm transmitting 5 of something to you. We'll keep it simple with coins. I'm giving you 5 Bitcoin in this case. And in this case, I need to make sure that I'm deducing 5 from my account and that you are receiving an input in this case, or excuse me, an output of 5 in this case. I'm putting in the input of 5 in this case, and you're getting the output of 5. So we fit that into the equation, but we can simplify this, as I mentioned. Let's shut it, into a smaller single Pedersen commitment in this case. I apologize, that should be 1 down there, but in this case, we've got 1 Pedersen commitment, where basically the 5s cancel out because it's -5 plus 5. In that case, it equals to 0. And that being multiplied by the same big number in both equations leads to 0 either way. It doesn't matter how large that big number is, because our values, so long as they cancel out, it'll be 0, and 0 multiplied by anything is 0. So that proves to the network in this case that we are deducting a specific amount of value from my wallet and transmitting that to someone else in the output. So they don't have to know what the value is, right? In this case, we can just mathematically prove it in this case. If it equals 0, there's been an equal transmission of value in that case that has a matching input and output in the process. So this completely masks the amount being sent because it always ends up to 0. So that's how you mask the amount within the equation. Now that we've done that, in this case, we can see again, just clarifying here, I forgot it. As I mentioned, 1 Pedersen commitment goes down to 0. In this case, we can actually just get rid of it because in the previous standard, we were adding it here, but there's nothing to add. It's 0. So we can just get down to the keys now. So we have key 1 and key 2 and multiplying that by a big number. Now, again, these keys are the variables in the sense that are going to allow us in this case to get access to transmitting this value in this case. So again, we get down to a very, very simple 1-line equation here, the different keys. And in the basic way that this works is that a part of the keys plays as a role, as I mentioned, as the private key in this case, right? And a portion of it as well is in the sense of being able to view the amount in the transaction in this case. So the only parties who should know what the value is really the sender and the receiver in this case, much like any privacy currency. Or if I were to hand you $5, you and I know that we did business in this case, but no one else has to know. So there's one thing to point out here, and again, as I pointed out earlier, it has to equal to 0 in the amount portion. If the amount portion equals anything else outside of it, if let's say, for example, 3 here in this example, this means that I tried to, in a sense, not so much double spend, but I tried to spend more than I have in inputs for outputs in this case. So in the case, maybe it would be that I subtracted 5 from my account, but I put an output of 8, for example, and that would equal to 3. If you add that to the key portion that's left over, you can actually see in what's known as the transaction kernel that this transaction is not true in this case. Because if you were to take the transaction kernel, and I was supposed to provide these private keys in this sense, these variables, I've got 23 and 83, it would not work, right? Because it does not divide into that. If we were to take all of our previous values, for example, here, 11, 57, 17, divide this number by all of those, plus our other 2 values that we mentioned, it will not work. It will not come out to the same value if we had, for example, as we mentioned, 20,348,034, right? Now, if we have the proper one here, 31, the original number, the key portion that it should come out to without this, then we will be able to prove with our private key that 23 and 83 are the right ones and that we can make a transaction. So very interesting stuff. This is basically, again, what MimbleWimble does in a sense. It uses these blinding factors to help mask both the amount and also who is sending in this case, making it confidential. But it also gives us this opportunity to have, in a sense, a multi-signature on transactions and to use these values as almost a private key to the transaction. So again, the only person who's going to have it, even the sender in this case, is not going to have the private key, right? That's one misconception that a lot of people will have. They do have a way where they both have access to viewing it at least from my interpretation of MimbleWimble. But the only person who has the variable once the transaction has been agreed upon from both parties is the the receiver in this case, who's going to have the ability to further send those transactions. They're the only one with the access to the private key. So this is a rough, very dumbed down explanation, but it's one that I can make decent sense of, and I hope has made some sense to you guys in this case. Again, there's a lot more technical things going on in the background with the elliptic curve cryptography, things of that sort, but they're things that we really don't need to understand to get an idea as to how this network is securingly making transactions, or making transactions in a secure manner. Now, in regards to projects and actually bringing this technology to life, so far from what I can do in regards to my research is that there's only about 2 projects that are really taking MimbleWimble to the mainstream and really trying to actually integrate it. Well, there's been some talks about trying to implement MimbleWimble on existing projects, but the 2 known ones that are new and up and coming and really focus, on a core factor of using MimbleWimble are Beam and Grin. Now, Grin has been around for a little bit longer, to my knowledge, but Beam actually just launched the other day, and Grin is planning to currently launch, I think, later in January of this year. But they're both implementations of MimbleWimble to a very decent degree. There is some differences, though. Beam provides some modifications to add additional features to the original implementation of MimbleWimble, whereas Grin is aiming to simply be monetary value transfer. So I think they're really trying to stick to a currency aspect that is censorship resistant, that you cannot trace, that you can't trace the amount of who sent it and how much was sent in this case. So again, simply trying to play on the currency play here in this case. And the other thing as well, I think that'd be important to mention, is they do have different data structures, and they're both not really using blockchains. So again, we're starting to see that people are starting to step away from blockchains in this case, and they don't really, to my understanding, they don't really need this. It's not the same blockchain either way that Bitcoin would have, and that's why you can have DAGs, for example, in this case, seeing as you're transmitting inputs and outputs. And the thing that's key to use here as a term is pruning. MimbleWimble allows you to prune data so that when you have inputs and outputs that are transmitted, they actually can kind of cancel out in a sense, right? So you're getting rid of unnecessary history, and it really reduces the data that is used on the ledger in this case. So hopefully that makes sense to a degree. Again, maybe I'll do a follow-up video better explaining that in the sense of pruning. There's some great videos and resources, which I'll leave linked down below, that'll further explain that. But one thing I wanted to point out here for Beam, just to show you guys, because I know we talked about this, and it sounds probably very complex in regards to understanding it even further, and we're thinking, oh my god, am I gonna have to know, am I gonna have to create these values, when I make these transactions, or am I going, in the sense of the variables, or the factors in this case that would go into the equation, am I gonna have to create some unique number every time and get really clever with it? No, you're not going to. This is all done behind the scenes, guys. It looks just like any other cryptocurrency wallet out there. I'm not trying to shill Beam. I'm just saying, in this sense, what's really good is that all of this stuff can be done behind the scenes. It'll be as if we're using Bitcoin, but it's just a different crypto using completely different technology. So it's very fascinating. I'm excited to see this. I'm excited to see some competition with the kind of old archaic way, even though it was just 10 years ago, of how Bitcoin records transactions. And if it means that we can bring real fungibility, which actually Bitcoin doesn't offer, it's a big misconception. Bitcoin does not offer fungibility because transactions, for example, you have a Bitcoin that, for example, could be just newly mined, and that actually holds some sense of privacy versus a coin, for example, that has a long archaic history to it. And with the way that it uses inputs and outputs, it's not a fungible currency in that sense. One Bitcoin doesn't always equal one Bitcoin. In this case, we do have fungibility, we do have privacy, and we do have an opportunity at real scalability to potentially reach hopefully hundreds, if not thousands, of transactions per second. So I'm really excited about this. I'd like to know what you all think about it, though. I hope I did justice to a decent degree of explaining this, guys. I'm sorry if I didn't do the best job. Again, I'll point you guys to a lot of resources down below, but I think it's a great start in this sense. So hopefully I got you guys thinking about it. I got you all excited about MimbleWimble, and If you want to learn more about it, I would definitely I'd definitely recommend you go look at not only the resources I have down below, but also just check out some of the projects that are working on it right now. I bet there are teams and people in the space as well who are excited about it. We'll talk further about it and talk about how to use these cryptocurrencies. Both are the two ones that we discussed are mining cryptocurrencies, so you can actually start mining them. You look into that as well if you guys are interested. But again, very interested in these two cryptocurrencies, very interested in this technology as a whole, and I cannot wait to see if this actually brings about the next major key step in the cryptocurrency space going forward. As someone who's excited about peer-to-peer digital currency, this technology seems like it is fitting directly in line with what crypto is all about: a transmission of value, a way to record value. In this case, being able to do it private, in a fungible way, and then also being able to do it in a scalable manner. Very excited about it. All right, that's enough rambling for today, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys liked the video, please leave a thumbs up down below, as well as a comment as to what you think about this, or if you have any questions. And also, if you guys would like to see more of these videos, I usually don't do too much technical content, but there are some technologies I'm keeping an eye on, or technologies that have been around for a while that I could explain. Leave a comment down below as to what you'd like to see next, and if you'd like to see more of these videos. Until the next video, though, everyone, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Stay tuned.